conference room hummed with the sharp, sterile energy of alpha dominance, clipped voices, the faint metallic tang of suppressed aggression, the unspoken hierarchy that made every breath feel calculated. I kept my spine straight, laptop angled to block half my face, and typed steadily, pretending the numbers on the screen held more weight than the suffocating tension in the air. At 27, I'd spent 5 years mastering the art of invisibility at Voss Innovations, and it wasn't by accident. I'm Ellis Reed, an Omega in a company run like a well-oiled alpha machine. The rules here were unwritten but ironclad. Omegas existed to serve, to stay out of the way, to never let their scent or presence disrupt the order. My survival depended on it. I wore neutral-toned suits in wool and cotton, fabrics that absorbed rather than amplified scent, spoke only when addressed, and fixed problems before they reached anyone's radar. Talent mattered, sure, but invisibility was the real currency. Get noticed by the wrong person, and you were either shuffled to a dead-end role or out the door. Get noticed by Silas Voss, the CEO who'd built an empire on control, who'd never once glanced at an Omega longer than it took to dismiss them. That wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. Silas stood at the head of the table, his tailored black suit clinging to broad shoulders, jaw set in a line that brooked no dissent. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the tech sector's history, and every inch of him screamed alpha. Sharp green eyes that cut through lies, a voice low and resonant that made grown men stutter, a presence so intense it felt like a physical weight. People straightened when he entered a room, spoke in half-sentences to avoid wasting his time, avoided his gaze like it might burn. I'd worked here 5 years and never exchanged more than 3 words with him. That was intentional. Beside him, Jasper Hale leaned slightly forward, his blonde hair styled to perfection, his pale blue eyes never straying far from Silas's face. Jasper was the only other Omega in the C-suite orbit, and he'd made himself indispensable by being everything I wasn't: polished, charismatic, unapologetically visible. He brought Silas's coffee exactly how he liked it. Black, no sugar, a splash of oat milk that no one else remembered, then positioned himself just close enough to be in Silas's peripheral vision without overstepping. The office whispered that they were something, though no one dared say it aloud. Jasper acted like he owned that space, like Silas's tolerance for him was a given, and he looked at people like me, quiet, unassuming, determined to blend in, like we were beneath his notice. A polite nod if we crossed paths, a dismissive glance if I lingered too long near his desk. I stayed out of his way. Ambition was a dangerous game, and I wasn't playing. That Wednesday started like any other. My alarm went off at 5:30. I downed my usual suppressant with a glass of cold water and headed to the office, already drafting emails in my head. The only blip was the suppressant itself. My regular brand was out of stock at the pharmacy, so I'd grabbed a generic substitute the night before. The label said it worked the same, fast-acting and long-lasting, so I didn't think twice. I didn't have time to. My to-do list was a mile long. Finalize the Q3 data analysis for the board, troubleshoot the glitch in the client portal, attend 3 back-to-back meetings. Invisibility required effort. You had to be everywhere and nowhere at once, efficient enough to be useful, unremarkable enough to be forgotten. The first meeting was the board review, and it was chaos. 10 department heads, all alphas, all talking over each other, all desperate to impress Silas. I slipped into my usual seat at the far end of the table, laptop open, notebook ready, and focused on typing every word. Silas was in the middle of tearing apart the marketing team's projections when I felt it, a faint warmth spreading across my collarbone, like someone had pressed a heated palm to my skin. I ignored it, fingers flying over the keyboard. Then my breathing hitched just a fraction, my chest feeling lighter, almost tingly. My fingers froze. No. I've been on suppressants since I presented at 16. I knew every side effect: dry mouth, mild headaches, the occasional fatigue. This wasn't that. This was different. A soft, sweet undercurrent in my own scent, something I'd only ever felt when my suppressants wore off during my heats, locked safely in my apartment. Panic pricked at the back of my throat, but I forced it down. I glanced around the table. No one reacted. The marketing director was defending his team's numbers. Jasper was nodding along with Silas's critique. Everyone's attention was fixed on the front of the room. Good. The scent was faint, barely there. Just enough for me to detect, not enough for anyone else. Or so I thought. Silas stopped speaking mid-sentence. The room went quiet. Not the gradual hush of people realizing the CEO had paused, but abrupt collective silence, like someone had hit a mute button. Every head turned toward him. Silas's jaw was tight, his green eyes narrowed, like he was trying to pinpoint a sound only he could hear. He scanned the room slowly, methodically, his gaze skimming over Jasper, over the department heads, over the analysts, until it landed on me. Time stopped. His eyes locked onto mine, sharp and intense, like he'd never really seen me before. Not the background blur I'd worked so hard to be, Ellis Reed, the quiet data guy, but something else. Something he couldn't look away from. My heart slammed against my ribs, so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to keep my expression neutral, to not fidget or look away. Showing weakness in front of an alpha like Silas was fatal. Then he inhaled. It was a small, controlled breath, barely noticeable, but I felt it like a physical touch. The air in the room shifted. Jasper's head snapped toward me, his polite smile vanishing, his blue eyes hardening into something cold and sharp. He noticed. Of course he had. Jasper noticed everything that might threaten his position. But Silas didn't look away from me. His shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in his jaw easing, like whatever he'd smelled had calmed some internal storm. Continue, he said, his voice lower than before, almost rough. The marketing director stumbled over his words, but the meeting resumed, though the energy was off, strained, awkward. Silas didn't speak again for the rest of the hour. His gaze drifted back to me 3 more times, each time lingering a beat too long, each time making my skin prickle. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out quickly, chattering nervously. Jasper passed me on his way out, and his voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a knife. "Watch yourself, Reed." I didn't respond. I just packed up my laptop and left, my hand shaking slightly. The suppressant wasn't working. That much was clear. I needed to fix this now. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my cubicle, typing furiously, avoiding eye contact, and checking my scent every 10 minutes. It was still faint, but it was there, a warm, honeyed vanilla with a hint of cedar, nothing overwhelming, but enough to be dangerous in a building full of alphas. I texted my doctor, begged for a refill of my regular suppressant, and made plans to leave early to pick it up. I just needed to get through the day without incident. Then the elevator happened. It was 6:30 p.m., and most people had left. I'd stayed late to finish the client portal glitch, and my head was throbbing. I pressed the button for the lobby, leaning against the cool metal wall, and closed my eyes for a second. The elevator doors slid shut, and I sighed, relieved to be alone. Then the doors slid open again. Silas stepped inside. My eyes flew open. He was alone, his suit jacket slung over one arm, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a flash of tanned skin. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him, but his gaze still sharpened when he saw me. "Mr. Voss," I said, straightening up, moving to the far corner of the elevator to give him space. It was instinct, Omega's move for alphas, especially alphas like Silas. He nodded, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and we were alone. The elevator began to descend, and the silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I stared at the floor, my heart racing. I could smell his scent, pine and smoke, rich and dominant, wrapping around me like a blanket. It was overwhelming, even for someone who'd built a career on ignoring alpha pheromones. Then I felt it. The shift in his breathing. It was subtle at first, just a slight unevenness, a break in his usual perfect control. I glanced up, and my breath caught. Silas was staring at me, his green eyes dark, his jaw tight. His hands were clenched at his sides, like he was fighting to hold himself back. The elevator was small, too small, the air thick with his alpha scent and my own faint vanilla. It was a dangerous combination. "Are you all right?" I asked before I could stop myself. It was a stupid question. Alphas like Silas didn't get "not all right." They didn't show weakness. He didn't answer. He just took a step toward me. I froze. He was close, too close. I could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell the pine and smoke mixing with my vanilla, creating something heady and intoxicating. My back hit the wall, and I pressed myself against it, trying to create distance. It didn't work. He took another step, trapping me between his body and the wall. His hands came up, bracketing my head on either side, his forearms brushing my shoulders. He didn't touch me, not exactly, but the proximity was enough to make my knees weak. His face was inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the slight flush on his cheeks, the way his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. He was losing control. Silas Voss, the man who'd built an empire on self-discipline, who'd never let an Omega's sin affect him, was unraveling right in front of me. "Your sin," he said, his voice rough, almost a growl. "It's—" He trailed off, like he couldn't find the words. He inhaled again, deeper this time, his eyes fluttering shut for a second. When he opened them, they were darker, hungrier. I can't stop smelling it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, panic rising. My suppressant, it's not working." "I'm fixing it, I swear." "Stop," he said, cutting me off. His thumb brushed against my cheek, just a light touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through my body. "Don't apologize. It's not bad. It's—" He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. "Calming. Like nothing I've ever smelled. Alphas didn't get calmed by Omega sense. They got aggressive, possessive, territorial. This was unheard of. This was dangerous." "Mr. Voss," I said, my voice shaking. "We shouldn't." "Silas," he said. "Call me Silas." The elevator chimed. We'd reached the lobby. The doors slid open, and Silas stepped back, his composure snapping back into place like a rubber band. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight, and stared at me for a long moment. "Go home, Ellis," he said, his voice back to its usual cool tone, though there was a hint of something beneath it, regret, longing, "and fix your suppressant. Please." He walked out before I could respond, leaving me standing in the elevator, my heart racing, my skin burning where he touched me. That night, I took twice the dose of the generic suppressant, scrubbed my skin raw with scent-neutral soap, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Silas had noticed me. Not just noticed, he'd reacted to me. And Jasper had noticed that reaction. I knew what that meant. Trouble. The kind of trouble that could get me fired or worse. I needed to go back to being invisible. I needed Silas to forget he'd ever smelled me. But the next morning, when I walked into the office, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Silas was in the break room when I got there, pouring coffee. He looked up when I entered, and our eyes met. He didn't look away. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and went back to pouring his coffee. But it was enough. Jasper, who was standing by the printer, saw it. His smile was tight as he walked over to me. "Early bird catches the worm, huh, Reed?" he said, his voice too cheerful. "Though I'm not sure what worms you're after. You've never been one for office politics." "I'm not," I said, grabbing a mug and filling it with water. "Just here to work." "Of course," he said, leaning against the counter, blocking my path. "But you know how it is. People talk. Especially after yesterday's meeting. And the elevator." He lowered his voice. "You should be careful. Silas doesn't like Omegas who try to get his attention. It never ends well." I wasn't trying to get his attention. I said, trying to move past him. He stepped in front of me, his smile vanishing. Then why can't he stop looking at you? Why did he leave the board meeting early yesterday to follow you to the elevator? He tilted his head, his blue eyes cold. You think you're special? That your little scent trick is going to make him forget everything? Forget me? I stared at him. I don't want him to forget anything. I just want to do my job. Then do it, he said, stepping aside. And stay out of his way. Before you get hurt. I walked out of the break room, my hands clenched into fists. Jasper was threatened. He thought I was after Silas's attention, after his spot. He didn't understand that I was running from it. That the last thing I wanted was to be noticed by the CEO. But Silas didn't get the memo. Over the next week, he found ways to be near me. He'd accidentally pass my cubicle 3 times a day, pausing to ask a question about the data I was working on, questions he could have asked anyone else, questions that didn't require his personal attention. He'd sit next to me in meetings, a spot that usually belonged to Jasper, his knee brushing mine under the table, his scent wrapping around me. He'd email me directly with feedback on my reports, detailed feedback that showed he'd actually read them, not just skimmed them. It was subtle, but it was deliberate. And it was driving Jasper crazy. Jasper's petty sabotage started small. He'd accidentally delete the files I'd sent to the team. He'd forget to invite me to important meetings. He'd misplace the reports I'd handed in for review. Each time he'd apologize with that fake smile, saying it was a mistake, but we both knew it wasn't. I didn't confront him. I just fixed the files, rescheduled the meetings, reprinted the reports. I kept my head down, worked harder, and prayed that Silas would lose interest. But he didn't. If anything, he got more persistent. One afternoon, I was working late again, trying to finish a project that was due the next day. The office was empty, the only sound the hum of the computers and the distant ticking of the clock. I was so focused on my screen that I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. Still here. I jumped, turning to find Silas standing behind my cubicle, his suit jacket over his arm, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but his eyes were soft when he looked at me. Just finishing up, I said, turning back to my laptop, my face heating up. This project's due first thing tomorrow. He leaned against the edge of my desk, his hip brushing my arm. I could smell his scent, pine and smoke, mixed with a faint vanilla of my own. It was a heady combination, and I had to fight to focus. Let me see, he said. I hesitated, then turned my laptop toward him. He leaned in, his shoulder brushing mine, and scanned the screen. His breath was warm against my neck, and I shivered. This looks good. Better than good, actually. You have a knack for simplifying complex data. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his face inches from mine. Our eyes met, and I felt that same pull as before, the same electricity, the same tension. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair off my forehead, his fingers lingering for a second too long. Ellis, he said, his voice low. I need to tell you something. Before he could, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jasper appeared at the end of the row of cubicles, his face hard when he saw us. Mr. Voss, he said, his voice tight. The board is waiting for you in the conference room. They're ready to review the Q3 projections. Silas pulled back, his composure returning. He nodded at Jasper, then looked back at me. We'll finish this later. He walked away, leaving me sitting there, my heart racing. Jasper stared at me for a long moment, then turned and followed Silas. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who just decided to eliminate a threat. I should have quit then. I should have packed up my things and walked out, found another job where I could be invisible again. But something stopped me. Something about Silas's touch, his voice, the way he looked at me like I mattered. Something that made me want to be seen, just for a little while. That was my mistake. A week later, the project review happened. It was the biggest meeting of the quarter, with the entire board, the executive team, and the key stakeholders in attendance. I'd worked for weeks on the data, double-checking every number, cross-referencing every report. I was ready, or so I thought. The meeting started off well. Silas led the presentation, his voice confident, his slides crisp and concise. Jasper stood beside him, nodding along, occasionally adding a comment that made the board members smile. I sat in my usual spot at the back, my laptop open, ready to answer any questions. Then it happened. One of the board members frowned at his screen. "Wait a minute," he said. "These numbers don't match the ones in the preliminary report. There's a discrepancy here, over $1 million in projected revenue." The room went quiet. Silas's gaze sharpened. "What are you talking about?" The board member pulled up the file on his screen. "The report Ellis submitted last night. It shows Q3 revenue at $12.7 million, but the preliminary report was $13.9 million. That's a huge difference." All eyes turned to me. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking. "I submitted the correct numbers. I double-checked them." Jasper stepped forward, his expression concerned. "Ellis, are you sure? You've been working so hard lately. Maybe you made a mistake? Accidentally saved the wrong file." "I didn't make a mistake," I said, staring at him. I knew exactly what was happening. Jasper had swapped the files. He'd accessed my account, deleted the correct report, and uploaded a falsified one. It was a setup. Silas walked over to the board member's computer, his jaw tight. He scanned the file, then looked at me. "Is this your work, Ellis?" "No," I said. "Jasper did this. He's the one who swapped the files." Jasper's eyes widened. "That's absurd. Why would I do that?" "I have no reason to." "Because you're jealous," I said, my voice rising. "Because Silas has been paying attention to me, and you can't stand it. You're scared he'll forget about you." The room gasped. No one spoke to Jasper like that. No one accused him of anything. Especially not an Omega like me. Jasper's face turned red. "How dare you?" "That's a lie. I've worked too hard to." "Enough," Silas said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room went silent. He looked at me, then at Jasper, then at the board. "We'll investigate this immediately. Until then, the meeting is adjourned." He walked out of the room, and everyone followed, chattering nervously. Jasper glared at me as he passed, his mouth set in a thin line. "You'll regret this, Reed." I sat there alone, my hands shaking. I'd accused the CEO's right-hand man of sabotage. I Dongjong embarrassed him. Even if I proved my innocence, I was done here. My career at Voss Innovations was over. Or so I thought. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Silas's assistant, though I noticed he didn't call her Jasper. He'd reassigned him to another department that morning, for the duration of the investigation. "Mr. Voss wants to see you in his office," she said. I walked to his office, my legs feeling like lead. His office was on the top floor, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. He was sitting behind his desk, his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered. "Close the door," he said. I did. He gestured for me to sit. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my hands in my lap. "Did you do it?" he asked, his voice quiet. "No," I said. "I didn't." He nodded. "I know." I looked at him, surprised. "You do." "I checked the server logs," he said. "Last night at 11:37 p.m., someone accessed your account from Jasper's computer. They deleted the original file and uploaded the falsified one. It was him." Relief washed over me. "Then why?" "Because I needed to be sure," he said. "And because I wanted to see how you'd handle it." "You didn't back down." "That's not the behavior of someone who's guilty." He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of me. He leaned against the edge of the desk, his legs brushing mine. "Jasper's been terminated," he said. "Effective immediately. He'll be escorted out of the building today." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "He was jealous," Silas said, his voice soft. "Not just of the attention I've been giving you, but of your talent. He's been padding his reports for months, taking credit for other people's work. This was just the final straw." He reached down, taking my hand in his. His fingers were warm, calloused from years of typing and building things. I froze, but I didn't pull away. "Ellis," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been trying to say for weeks." He knelt down in front of me, his hand still holding mine. His green eyes were soft, vulnerable, something I'd never seen from him before. "I've never reacted to an Omega's scent like this," he said. "Never. I've always found them overwhelming, aggravating. But yours, it's like a lifeline. When I'm around you, I can breathe. I can think. I don't feel the need to be in control every second." He squeezed my hand. I thought it was just the scent. I tried to tell myself it was just biology, that it would fade. But it hasn't. It's gotten stronger. Because it's not just the scent, Ellis. It's you. The way you work so hard, the way you stay quiet but always have something important to say, the way you don't back down when you're right, the way you make me want to be better. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I'd spent my entire life trying to be invisible, and now the most powerful alpha I'd ever met was telling me he saw me, that he wanted me. "I'm an Omega," I said, my voice shaking. "You're an alpha, a CO. This can't work. The company will adapt," he said, cutting me off. "Or it won't. I don't care. For the first time in my life, I care about something more than work. More than control. I care about you." He leaned closer, his forehead touching mine. "I know this is scary. I know you're used to hiding. But you don't have to hide from me. Not anymore." He kissed me then. It was soft, gentle, nothing like the rough, desperate kiss I'd imagined from an alpha like him. It was a kiss that said, "I'm here, I'm yours, I'm not going anywhere." I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair, my heart racing. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you," he said. "Not anymore." I nodded, smiling through my tears. "I believe you." We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, the city lights glowing outside the window. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to be invisible. I wanted to be seen. By him. The next morning, I walked into the office with Silas by my side. We didn't hold hands, but we were close, and everyone noticed. They whispered, they stared, but no one said anything. Not when Silas introduced me as his partner in the team meeting. Not when he moved my desk into his office for easier collaboration, he said, though we both knew the truth. Not when he kissed me goodbye before leaving for a business trip. It wasn't easy. There were still people who didn't approve, who thought an Omega shouldn't be with the CEO. There were days when I wanted to go back to hiding, to the safety of invisibility. But then Silas would look at me, and I'd remember that being seen wasn't the danger I thought it was. That being loved, truly, deeply loved, was worth the risk. 3 months later, we took a trip to the mountains. Just the two of us, no work, no meetings, no Jasper. We stayed in a small cabin, built a fire, and watched the stars. Silas held me in his arms, his scent wrapping around me, and I knew I'd never go back to hiding. "You know," he said, kissing the top of my head, "I never noticed you before that meeting." "Not really. But now I can't imagine not noticing you. You're everywhere. In my thoughts, in my dreams, in every decision I make." I smiled, snuggling closer to him. "I never thought I'd be the one to make an alpha like you lose control." He laughed, a deep, rich sound that made my heart flutter. You're not just any Omega, Ellis. You're mine. And I'd lose control for you 1,000 times over. I kissed him then, under the stars, knowing that this was just the beginning. That there would be challenges, that people would still talk, that we'd have to fight for what we had. But it didn't matter. Because we had each other. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Seen, loved, home. The cabin in the Rockies smelled like pine and would smoke, the air crisp and cold enough to make my nose tingle. Silas had built a fire in the stone hearth, and the flames cast warm, flickering light across his face as he sat on the floor, his back against the couch, legs stretched out in front of him. I was curled up beside him, my head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist. Outside, snow was falling softly, blanketing the trees in white, and for a moment, the world felt small, quiet, perfect, and entirely ours. You're thinking too hard, Silas said, his voice rumbling against my cheek. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his fingers brushing gently over the back of my neck, right where my scent gland was. It was a possessive gesture, an alpha's way of marking what was his, but it didn't scare me. Not anymore. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, I admitted, turning my face to look at him. His green eyes were soft in the firelight, no trace of the cold, commanding the awe I'd first met. This is too good to be true. The office, your family, Jasper, something's going to go wrong. Silas's jaw tightened slightly. My family doesn't get a say in who I choose. And Jasper's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. I raised an eyebrow. You really think he'll just disappear? He spent years currying favor with you, building his career around being your right-hand Omega. You fired him, publicly humiliated him. He's not going to let that go. Silas sighed, pulling me closer. I've got security on him. He can't get near you, or the company. And as for my family, he trailed off, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. My father's never approved of anything I do. He wanted me to marry an alpha, expand the family business, not waste my time with an Omega from a nothing background. The words stung, even though I knew they weren't Silas's. I'd always been aware of the gap between us, his wealth, his status, his alpha dominance versus my quiet, middle-class upbringing, my Omega vulnerability. It was a chasm that felt impossible to bridge sometimes. Maybe he's right, I said, looking away. Maybe we're too different. Maybe this. Silas grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. His eyes were sharp, determined. Don't say that. I don't care about our backgrounds, or what my father thinks, or what anyone else says. You're the first person who's ever seen me, not Silas Voss, CEO of Voss Innovations, but just me. And I'm not letting that go. He kissed me then, hard and hungry, a stark contrast to the gentle kisses we'd shared earlier. It was a kiss that said, I'm yours. I'm not letting you doubt this. I'm going to fight for us. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his sweater, my body pressing against his. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and for a moment all the doubts, all the fears, faded away. But they didn't stay gone. We returned to the city a week later, and the first thing we noticed was the tension in the office. Whispers followed us wherever we went, stares that lingered too long, smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Silas had made it clear that we were together. He'd introduced me as his partner in a company-wide email, had moved my desk into his office, a spacious corner with a view, far from the cramped cubicle I'd occupied for 5 years, had even kissed me goodbye in the lobby once just to make a point. But acceptance was slow in coming. Most of the alphas in the company avoided me, their sense sharp with discomfort or disapproval. A few of the Omegas were friendlier. Mia from HR brought me coffee every morning and whispered gossip about who was on our side and who wasn't. But for the most part, I was an outcast. The Omega who tricked the CEO, as one particularly cruel whisper put it. Silas noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He'd squeeze my hand under the table during meetings when he saw me tensing up, would snap at anyone who dared to speak to me disrespectfully, would stay late with me just to keep me company when the loneliness got too heavy. "You don't have to pretend this doesn't bother you," he said one night as we sat in his office, the city lights glowing outside. I was finishing up a report, and he was going over budgets, but neither of us was really working. "I know it's hard. I'm sorry. It's not your fault," I said, closing my laptop. "I knew this would happen. I just didn't expect it to hurt so much." He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of me. He knelt down, taking my hands in his eyes level with mine. "I'm proud of you. You're handling this with so much grace. More than I ever could." I smiled, squeezing his hands. "I have a good teacher." He kissed me then, soft and slow, and for a moment the office didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. But then the first real threat came. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was leaving the office early to pick up groceries. I walked out of the building, pulling my coat tighter against the cold, and headed toward the subway. I was halfway there when I heard someone call my name. "Ellis, wait up." I turned, expecting to see Mia or one of the few other people who'd been kind to me. Instead, I saw Jasper. He was standing on the sidewalk, a tight smile on his face, his blonde hair styled just as perfectly as always. But his eyes were cold, his scent sharp with anger and something else, fear maybe. He looked different, somehow, without the expensive suits and the air of importance he'd carried at Voss Innovations. He was wearing a cheap jacket and jeans, his shoes scuffed, and there was a haggard look about him that hadn't been there before. "Jasper," I said, tensing up. My hand went on my phone, ready to call Silas. "What do you want?" "Can we talk?" he said, stepping closer. His scent was overwhelming, sweet, cloying, with an undercurrent of bitterness. "Just for a minute." "I won't hurt you, I promise." I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to run, to get away from him as fast as possible. But curiosity got the better of me. "Why should I talk to you? You tried to ruin my career. You lied about me. You set me up." Jasper's smile faded. "I know. And I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I'd do it again if I had to. But for how it made you feel. I was scared, Ellis. Scared that Silas would forget about me, that I'd lose everything I'd worked for." "You didn't have to hurt me to keep your job," I said. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You don't get it. Omegas like us, we don't get to just keep our jobs. We have to fight for them. Every single day. I fought for years to get where I was, to be close to Silas, to matter. And then you came along, quiet, unassuming, no ambition, and he noticed you. Just like that." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "What is it about you, Ellis? What makes you so special? Is it your scent? Is that all it takes to make a powerful alpha lose his mind?" "I don't know," I said, taking a step back. "And I don't care. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to do my job, to stay invisible." "Then why didn't you?" he said, his voice rising. "Why didn't you just stay in your cubicle, keep your head down, and let me have him? You could have had a normal life, a normal career. But no, you had to stand out. You had to take what wasn't yours." "I didn't take anything," I said, my voice shaking. "Silas chose me. He chose me because he likes me, not because of my sin, not because of anything else. And you can't stand that." Jasper's face turned red. "You think he'll keep choosing you? You think this is forever? Alpha-Omega relationships don't last, Ellis. Especially not between a CEO and a low-level analyst. He'll get bored of you, of your quiet little life, and then where will you be? Back to being invisible, but this time everyone will know you're a failure." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And when he leaves you, don't come crying to me. I warned you." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, my heart racing. His words echoed in my head. "He'll get bored of you. This won't last. You're a failure." I knew they were just words, just the bitter ramblings of a man who'd lost everything. But they stung. Because deep down, I was scared he was right. I called Silas as soon as I got home. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with concern. Ellis? Are you okay? You're home early. I sought Jasper, I said, sitting down on the couch, my hands still shaking. He stopped me on the street. He talked to me. He said you'll get bored of me. That this won't last. Silas cursed softly. Where did you see him? Are you hurt? I'm fine, I said. He didn't touch me. He just talked. Try to get in my head. He won't be bothering you again, Silas said, his voice cold. I'll have my security team increase patrols around your apartment, around the office. He won't get within 100 feet of you. I know, I said, but my voice was still shaky. It's not that. It's what he said. What if he's right, Silas? What if you do get bored of me? What if this us is just a phase? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Silas said, I'm coming over. He arrived 10 minutes later, his coat covered in snow, his face set in a hard line. He walked into my apartment, kicked off his shoes, and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his scent, pine and smoke, safe and familiar, and let the tears I've been holding back fall. He's wrong, Silas said, his voice soft against my hair. So wrong. I'm not going anywhere, Ellis. This isn't a phase. This is forever. I spent my entire life being alone, being in control, being the person everyone expects me to be. But with you, I'm free. I'm happy. And I'm not giving that up for anything. He pulled back, wiping the tears from my face with his thumb. Do you remember the first time I kissed you? In my office, after we found out Jasper set you up? I told you I'd never reacted to an Omega's scent like that. But it's more than that. It's the way you laugh at my bad jokes, the way you stay up with me when I'm stressed about work, the way you look at me like I'm not just a CEO but a man. You see me, Ellis. And I see you. That's not something you get bored of. That's something you fight for. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm scared. I admit it. Scared of losing you. Scared of what people will say. Scared of not being good enough for you. You are good enough, Silas said, his voice firm. More than good enough. And I'm scared too. Scared of losing you. Scared of not being able to protect you. Scared of messing this up. But we're in this together. We'll face it together. He kissed me then, one rower Jan Ding, and in that moment, I believed him. I believed that we could face whatever came our way. Jasper's threats, his family's disapproval, the whispers in the office. Because we had each other. But the worst was yet to come. A month later, Silas's father, Victor Voss, showed up at the office. I was in Silas's office, going over data for an upcoming presentation, when the door slammed open. Victor Voss stood in the doorway, his face red with anger, his scent sharp and aggressive. Alpha dominance turned toxic. He was tall, with the same green eyes as Silas, but there was none of Silas's warmth in them. Just cold, hard disdain. Silas, he said, his voice booming. We need to talk. Now. Silas stood up, his body tensing, his arm wrapping protectively around my waist. Father, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be on this floor without an appointment. I don't need an appointment to talk to my son, Victor said, his eyes narrowing as they landed on me. Especially not when my son is throwing away his career, his legacy for some. Omega. The word Omega dripped with contempt, and I felt Silas's grip on my waist tighten. Ellis is my partner, father. Show him some respect. Respect. Victor laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Respect is earned. This boy, he gestured at me, his nose wrinkling in disgust, has done nothing to earn my respect. He's a gold digger, Silas. A manipulative Omega who's using his scent to trick you into giving him power, money, status. Can you see that? I'm not using him, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my stomach. I love him. And he loves me. Victor's eyes widened. Then he laughed again. Love? Please. Omegas don't feel love. They feel need. They feel greed. This is a game to him, Silas. A game he's winning. But when he gets what he wants, when he's drained you dry, he'll leave you. And then where will you be? Alone, humiliated, your company in shambles. Silas stepped forward, putting himself between me and his father. His scent flared, sharp and protective, a warning. That's enough. Ellis is not a gold digger. He's not manipulative. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And if you can't accept that, then you're not welcome here. Not in my office, not in my life. Victor's face turned purple with rage. You're choosing him over your family, over your company, over everything we've built. I'm choosing happiness, Silas said. Something you've never understood, Father. You've spent your entire life chasing power, chasing money, and you're miserable. I'm not going to be like you. I'm not going to let you ruin this for me. You'll regret this, Victor said, his voice cold. Mark my words. This Omega will be the end of you. The end of Voss Innovations. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The office fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Silas let out a shaky breath, turning to look at me. His eyes were filled with concern. Are you okay? He asked, his hands cupping my face. I nodded, but my hands were still shaking. I'm fine. He's just angry. He'll get over it. Silas sighed, pulling me into his arms. No, he won't. My father doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. He'll try to ruin us, Ellis. He'll try to take the company from me, to turn everyone against us. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his scent. We'll fight back. Together. We will, he said, kissing the top of my head. But it won't be easy. Are you sure you want this? Sure, you want to deal with my father, with the company, with everything else. I pulled back, looking at him. I'm sure. Because you're worth it. All of it. He kissed me then, a kiss full of promise and determination, and I knew that no matter what Victor threw at us, no matter what Jasper did, no matter what the world said, we'd face it together. But the next blow came faster than we expected. A week after Victor's visit, the story broke in the tabloids. Tech CEO Silas Voss caught in scandalous affair with low-level Omega, the headlines screamed. There were photos of us, kissing in the lobby of his apartment building, holding hands on the street, even a blurry shot of me leaving his office late at night. The story was full of lies, claims that I'd seduced Silas to get a promotion, that I was embezzling company funds, that I'd had affairs with other alphas in the company. It was vicious, it was cruel, and it was everywhere. The office exploded with gossip. People stared at me openly, whispered about me behind my back, avoided me like I had the plague. Mia stopped bringing me coffee. Even the few people who'd been friendly to me before turned their backs. It was like I was back to being invisible, but worse, this time everyone was looking at me, and what they saw was a monster. Silas tried to fix it. He issued a statement denying the rumors, threatening to sue the tabloids for defamation. He even held a company-wide meeting to set the record straight. But it was too late. The damage was done. People believed what they wanted to believe, that the Omega had tricked the CEO, that I was a villain. I started having panic attacks. Small ones at first, shortness of breath, a racing heart, a feeling of impending doom, but they got worse. I'd hide in the bathroom during work, hyperventilating, trying to calm down. I'd lie awake at night, replaying the rumors in my head, wondering if everyone was right, wondering if I was a mistake. Silas noticed, of course. He'd hold me when I panicked, stay up with me when I couldn't sleep, tell me over and over again that the rumors weren't true, that he loved me. But it didn't help. The doubt was too strong. The loneliness was too heavy. One night, after a particularly bad panic attack, I sat on the couch staring at the wall while Silas made me tea. I think I need to leave, I said, my voice quiet. Silas froze. What? Leave where? Leave the company, I said. Leave you? He turned around, his face pale. Ellis, no. Don't say that. The rumors will die down. People will forget. We can get through this. I don't think we can, I said, tears filling my eyes. Every time I walk into the office, people stare at me. They whisper about me. They hate me. And it's not just the office. It's everywhere. The tabloids, social media, even my family. My mother called me asking if it's true. Asking if I'm a gold digger. I wiped my eyes. I can't do this anymore, Silas. I'm tired. I'm scared. I just want to go back to being normal. To being invisible. Silas walked over to me, kneeling down in front of me. He took my hands in his eyes filled with pain. You can't leave me. Please. I love you. More than anything. I can't lose you. I love you too, I said, my voice breaking. But love isn't enough. Not when it's this hard. Not when it's tearing me apart. He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. What if we leave the city? Start over somewhere else. Away from the rumors, away from my father, away from everything. We can get a small house, get new jobs, just be us. I stared at him. The idea was tempting. Running away, starting over, leaving all the pain and the drama behind. But it was also scary. Leaving everything I knew, everything I'd worked for, just to be with him. Was it worth it? Would you really do that? I asked. Leave Voss Innovations? Leave your company? Your life? Silas nodded. In a heartbeat. The company doesn't matter without you. My life doesn't matter without you. You're my home, Ellis. Not the city, not the office, not the money. You. I cried then, big, ugly tears, and Silas held me. He held me while I cried out all the fear, all the pain, all the doubt. He held me until I calmed down, until my breathing steadied, until I could think clearly. And when I did, I knew what I wanted. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to go back to being invisible. I wanted to fight. For us. I don't want to leave, I said, pulling back to look at him. I want to stay. I want to fight. With you. Silas's face lit up. Really? I nodded. Really? Because you're right. Love is enough. And I'm not going to let the rumors or your father or Jasper or anyone else tear us apart. We're in this together. Remember? He kissed me then, a kiss full of relief and joy and love, and I knew that no matter what came next, we'd face it. Together. The next morning, we walked into the office hand in hand. We didn't care about the stares, the whispers, the looks of disdain. We held our heads high, and we smiled. And slowly, things started to change. Mia started bringing me coffee again. A few of the other Omegas started talking to me, apologizing for ignoring me. Even some of the Alphas started to come around after Silas promoted me to his executive assistant, giving me a seat at the table, showing everyone that I was more than just his Omega partner, that I was talented, that I deserved to be there. The rumors died down. The tabloids moved on to the next scandal. Victor didn't back down. He still tried to sabotage Silas, still tried to turn the board against him, but it didn't work. The board respected Silas, trusted him, and they could see how happy he was with me. They saw that I wasn't a gold digger, that I was an asset to the company. Jasper never bothered me again. Silas's security team made sure of that. I heard he left the city, moved to another state, tried to start over. I hoped he succeeded. I hoped he found happiness, even if it wasn't with Silas. 6 months later, we got married. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, the few members of Silas's family who'd accepted us, in the same cabin in the Rockies where we'd spent our first vacation. The snow was falling, the fire was crackling, and Silas looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I love you, he said, slipping a simple silver ring on my finger. More than words can say. More than I ever thought possible. I love you too, I said, slipping a matching ring on his finger. Forever. He kissed me then, and for a moment time stood still. The world faded away, and there was just us, Silas and Ellis, Alpha and Omega, partners, lovers, husbands. A year later, we were sitting in Silas's office, watching the sunset over the city. I was 7 months pregnant with our son, my hand resting on my belly, while Silas wrapped his arm around me. The office was quiet, peaceful. The whispers were gone. The stares were gone. The fear was gone. You know, I said, smiling, I never thought I'd be here. Married to the CEO, pregnant with his child, sitting in his office, feeling like I belong. Silas kissed the top of my head. Neither did I. But I'm glad we are. I'm glad I noticed you that day in the meeting. Glad your suppressant failed. Glad we didn't give up. I laughed. Me too. Even though it was scary. Even though it was hard. It was worth it, he said, his hand covering mine on my belly. Every single second. I nodded. It was worth it. All the pain, all the fear, all the doubt. It was worth it to be here, with him, feeling loved, feeling seen, feeling home. The elevator incident had been the beginning of a love story, of a fight, of a life I'd never imagined. I'd gone from being invisible to being the most important person in the world to a man who'd built his life on control. I'd gone from being scared of being noticed to loving every second of it. And as I sat there, with Silas's arm around me, feeling our son kick, I knew that this was just the beginning. That there would be more challenges, more fights, more moments of doubt. But it didn't matter. Because we had each other. We were in this together. Forever. The sound of tiny feet pattering across the hardwood floor woke Ellis at 6 a.m. Soft golden sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, draping the quiet master bedroom in gentle warmth. Before Ellis could fully regain his senses, a fluffy little figure rushed straight to the big bed, bouncing lightly on the soft mattress without any restraint. "Daddy, wake up quickly." 3-year-old Elias threw himself into Ellis's arms without hesitation. His short dark hair was messy after waking up, and his bright green eyes were exactly the same as Silas's, shining with pure excitement. As a young alpha child, his unique sweet cinnamon scent wrapped tightly around Ellis's body, mixing with Ellis's own faint vanilla pheromone, forming the softest and most reassuring smell in the world. Ellis opened his eyes slowly, raising his hand to stroke his son's soft hair, his eyes filled with endless tenderness. "Good morning, baby. Did you have a nice sleep last night?" Elias nodded vigorously, leaning his small face against Ellis's neck and acting coquettishly. "I slept very well. I dreamed of many big wolves. They smell just like Papa." Hearing this, Ellis couldn't help but laugh softly. Silas's inherent alpha pheromone was cold pine mixed with faint tobacco, powerful and steady, which had long been engraved in everyone's mind in the family. Even the young Elias could easily distinguish the most familiar smell belonging to his father. "Papa is making breakfast in the kitchen now. He made your favorite blueberry pancakes today." Ellis sat up slowly, tidying his loose home clothes, and watched his son jump off the bed excitedly. As soon as he heard there were pancakes, Elias couldn't stay still any longer. He ran out of the bedroom in small strides, and his clear laughter echoed all over the quiet villa, breaking the tranquility of the early morning. Ellis got out of bed and walked slowly towards the kitchen. Standing at the door, he quietly looked at the busy figure in front of the stove. Silas had already changed out of his cold and meticulous business suit, wearing simple gray, casual sweatpants and a close-fitting black short-sleeved shirt. His broad and powerful shoulders were unobstructed, and his whole person lost the sharp aura of a corporate C, leaving only gentle and down-to-earth warmth. He was skillfully flipping pancakes with a spatula, his movements steady and proficient. Little Elias stood on a small stool beside him, tiptoeing to stare at the round pancakes in the pan, his little hands tugging at the corner of Silas's clothes from time to time, whispering childish requests. "Papa, make the pancake bigger, the bigger the better." Silas turned his head, the cold lines on his handsome face softening instantly. His deep green eyes first fell on the lively little guy beside him, then gently looked at Ellis standing at the door, and his low magnetic voice was extremely soft. "Are you awake? Did you sleep comfortably?" Ellis walked over gently, leaned close to him, and took the initiative to kiss his warm cheek. "I slept well. You got up so early again." "I'm used to it." Silas put down the spatula, naturally stretched out his long arms to wrap Ellis in his arms, and pressed his forehead lightly against his. The cold pine scent all over his body quietly surrounded Ellis, giving him an incomparable sense of security that he had never had before. "I want to make breakfast for you and the child with my own hands." These years of getting along had completely smoothed out all the impetuosity and coldness in Silas's character. He was still the decisive and powerful alpha CEO outside, but in front of Ellis and his children, he was only the most ordinary and gentle family man. Ellis hugged his waist back comfortably, leaning quietly in his warm embrace, recalling all the past events in his mind. At the beginning, he was just an inconspicuous Omega employee, hiding his identity in the company, carefully hiding his pheromones, trying his best to live in obscurity, never daring to have any extravagant hopes for the high-ranking top alpha Silas. It was just an accidental elevator incident that made his out-of-control vanilla scent break through all barriers, disturbing the calm heart that Silas had maintained for many years, and thus pulled the two people who were originally parallel in life tightly together. They had experienced office gossip, malicious framing from competitors, strong opposition from Silas's family, and countless public opinions and doubts. They had hesitated, been confused, and even thought of giving up countless times, but in the end, they held each other's hands firmly and walked through all the hardships and difficulties. Now they have a stable and warm family, a lovely child, and a peaceful and happy life that they once dared not expect. Daddy and Papa are kissing. It's so embarrassing. Elias covered his eyes with his small hands, twisting his body and making a childish, disgusted sound, breaking the sweet atmosphere between the two. Silas laughed heartily, bent down and rubbed his son's messy hair casually. "This is the way adults express love. When you grow up, you will understand." After the warm breakfast, the whole family prepared to go to the city zoo together. Elias had been looking forward to going to see the wolves in the zoo for a long time, always saying that the wolves were just like his powerful father. Ellis carefully dressed his son in a small wolf-pattern coat and put a delicate silver wolf pendant around his neck. This was a gift carefully prepared by Silas when Elias was born, symbolizing Alpha's firm protection. "Wear it well. This pendant will always protect you." Ellis squatted down, arranging the collar for his child carefully. "I know. I will also protect Daddy and Papa when I grow up." Elias puffed out his small chest, with a serious and firm expression on his childish face, which made Ellis's heart soft instantly. Silas packed a backpack full of snacks and daily necessities, took Ellis's little hand in one hand, and held Ellis's warm palm tightly in the other. The three of them walked out of the villa side by side, bathed in the bright morning sun, and the atmosphere was warm and harmonious. In the car, Elias kept chattering non-stop, talking about all kinds of small animals he wanted to see, and his lively voice never stopped. Silas concentrated on driving, and his warm big hand always rested gently on Ellis's knee, silently accompanying his lover beside him. Along the way, their eyes met tacitly from time to time, and all the lingering affection was hidden in the silent eye contact. After arriving at the zoo, Elias immediately broke free from his parent hands and ran towards the wolf breeding area excitedly. Silas and Ellis followed slowly, watching the running little figure with soft eyes. In front of the wolf enclosure, a group of strong gray wolves paced leisurely. The leading wolf was majestic and powerful, with a strong aura of a leader of the group. Silas knelt down and pointed at the leading wolf to explain to his son seriously. "Look, this is the alpha wolf in the wolf group, who is responsible for protecting all his partners. Just like Papa," Elias shouted loudly with bright eyes. "Yes, just like me." Silas smiled and hugged his son into his arms, his eyes full of doting. You will also become an excellent, powerful alpha in the future, guarding the people you love deeply. Ellis stood aside, watching the warm interaction between father and son, and the corners of his mouth always maintained a gentle smile. All the unease and inferiority he had hidden in his heart in the past had long been completely dispelled by Silas's sincere love and firm protection. He no longer needed to hide his identity carefully, no longer needed to pretend to be indifferent and obscure, and could openly accept all the love and warmth given by this family. They wandered in the zoo for a whole morning, watching tall giraffes, fierce tigers, and cute little rabbits. Elias was full of curiosity about everything, running around happily, and the whole zoo was filled with his cheerful laughter. At noon, the family found a quiet picnic rest area to have a simple lunch. After eating and drinking enough, Elias was tired from playing, lying lazily on the lawn chasing colorful butterflies, while Silas and Ellis sat side by side on the bench, enjoying the rare peaceful leisure time. Time passes really fast. In the blink of an eye, the child is already 3 years old. Ellis leaned gently on Silas's shoulder, his tone full of emotion. Silas held him tightly in his arms, his chin lightly resting on the top of his hair, and the warm breath sprinkled on his hair tips. As long as our family is safe and happy, every day is worthwhile. I still remember that I was extremely flustered and scared when my pheromone lost control in the elevator. I never thought that it would become the most precious fate in my life. Ellis whispered softly, recalling the thrilling and ambiguous encounter at the beginning, and his heart was still full of throbbing. I have never been affected by any omega pheromone for so many years. Only your vanilla scent can easily break all my self-control and make me lose my mind completely. Silas lowered his head, kissed his forehead gently, and his deep voice was full of deep affection. From the moment I smelled your scent, I knew I could no longer let you go. All the accidents at the beginning were destined deep fate. From being strangers who had no intersection, to ambiguous entanglement full of tension, to going through wind and rain side by side, and finally forming a warm and complete family, every step they took was full of sincerity and perseverance. In the afternoon, they bought Elias's favorite chocolate ice cream. The little guy held the ice cream and smiled happily, sitting safely in Silas's arms, enjoying the warm company of his parents. When night fell, after bathing and coaxing Elias to fall asleep peacefully, the noisy villa finally returned to tranquility. Silas and Ellis sat quietly on the sofa in the living room, watching the warm fire burning in the fireplace, snuggling closely together to enjoy the quiet time for two. Don't worry about anything anymore. No one can separate us. Silas held Ellis's cold hand tightly, his eyes firm and solemn. Ellis nodded heavily, leaned his head on his chest, listening to his steady and powerful heartbeat, and his heart was filled with full happiness. The cold pine scent belonging to Alpha, the soft vanilla scent of Omega, and the tender cinnamon scent of the child are intertwined all the time in his home, blending into the most beautiful and warm smell of home. They have gone through all the difficulties and obstacles hand in hand, and finally bid farewell to all darkness and unease. From the accidental heartbeat in the narrow elevator to the stable happiness of 3 people now, all encounters and persistence have become the best gifts in life. In the long years to come, they will still hold each other's hands tightly, guard their small family together, and spend every ordinary and warm day peacefully and happily.